I wanted to talk about how I believe Jesus came to America before the Europeans did and had an influence on the Constitution of the United States through the Iroquois Confederacy. So I'm going to read what I wrote. Despite what you've been taught in school, the founders of the Constitution of the United States were greatly influenced by the Iroquois Confederacy, which was already established long before the Europeans arrived. It was founded by the great Peacemaker in 1142 and is the oldest living participatory democracy on earth. The great Peacemaker was Huron, and before he was born, a messenger from the Great Spirit told his grandmother that it is the will of the Master of Life, the holder of the heavens, that thy daughter shall bear a child, and he shall be called Daganawida, the Master of Things, for he brings with him the good news of peace and power. When the Europeans arrived in America, this Iroquois League was the most extensive and important political unit north of the Aztec civilization. It united 5 principal Indian nations, which were the Mohawk, Onondaga, Seneca, Oneida, and Cayuga. Each nation had a council composed of delegates called sachems, sachems, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, who were elected by the tribes of that nation. Each of these nations governed their own territory, but they all agreed that common causes would be decided in the Grand Council of Chiefs. This was based on peace and the consensus instead of fighting. In 1744, the Onondaga leader Canasatego gave a speech urging the contentious 13 colonies to unite, as the Iroquois had at the signing of the Treaty of Lancaster. English colonist Benjamin Franklin, who was an official printer for the colony of Pennsylvania, was so inspired by the speech that he printed it for all to read and preserve. Benjamin became a lifelong champion of the Indian political structure and advocated its use by the Americans. He called on the English colonies to unite and emulate the Iroquois League. Franklin referred to the Iroquois model as he presented in his plan of the Union at the Albany Congress in 1754 and invited the great council members of the Iroquois to address the Continental Congress in 1776. The United States Constitution mirrors the Iroquois Confederacy in many ways. Visually, it is present in the bundle of arrows held by the eagle in the Great Seal of the United States. It was inspired by Canasatoga's speech when he used a metaphor that many arrows cannot be broken as easily as one. We are a powerful confederacy, he said, and by your observing the same methods of our wise forefathers have taken, you will acquire fresh strength and power. Therefore, whatever befalls you, never fall out of one with another. The native people who lived under the Iroquois Confederacy were happier than the Europeans had ever seen. In 1786, Thomas Jefferson said to Edward Carrington, I am convinced that those societies which live without government enjoy their general mass an infinitely greater degree of happiness than those who live under European governments. In 1775, James Adair wrote, their whole constitution breathes nothing but liberty. There glows such a cheerfulness and warmth of courage in each of their breasts as cannot be described. We all know that eventually the Native Americans were pushed out of their homelands and treated horribly with war, disease, and broken treaties. But I don't think it was God's desire for this to happen when the two continents of people came together. I think God was using Daganoweda to teach the Europeans about how to live a life of freedom and peace. I actually think Daganoweda was Jesus who had visited the Americas hundreds of years before. And here's why I think that. The fourth covenant God made with man in the Bible is the covenant with King David, who ruled the tribe of Israel. God asked David to partner with him in leading Israel to obey the laws and doing what is right and good. God's promise was that he would extend God's kingdom of peace and blessing over all the nations. Although Israel breaks the covenant, it was prophesied by the prophets that the new covenant would be fulfilled, and it was eventually fulfilled by Jesus, who was a descendant of King David. It's interesting that the Iroquois Confederacy, founded by Daganoweda, the Peacemaker, greatly influenced the United States Constitution, which is looked upon by the world as an example of true freedom. And that Daganoweda was born at the Huron settlement on the north shore of Lake Ontario. Today, a town by the name of Kingstown, Ontario, is placed there. Although it was named Kingstown in honor of King George III, it could be a clue as to who Daganoweda really was. Number two, example of that it could be Jesus was, in the Bible, the first miracle Jesus performed was turning the water into wine at a wedding in Galilee. Jesus instructed the servants of the wedding to fill 6 ceremonial stone cisterns with water. According to Hebrew law of Moses, stone vessels were used to store living water for ritual washing or bathing. Stone vessels would not become impure, unlike the often used clay pottery of ancient times. Jesus was referred to as the living water many times in the Bible. In the historical story of Daganoweda, the Peacemaker, after he had grown to manhood, it would be time for him to leave home to spread the good news of peace and power. And when he left home to start his journey, strangely enough, he set out on a canoe made of white stone. His grandmother feared the canoe would sink, but Daganoweda replied, "It will float, and this shall be a sign that my words are true." Now there's a third comparison to Jesus being the tree in Genesis, and it relates to the Iroquois Confederacy, but it would make this video too long, so I'll follow up another time with that information. Just remember, when God described himself to Moses, he said, "I am who I am," which means I will become what I choose to become.